Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you're watching this. I hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I am author, and I'm an author. I am author. Sorry. And I am coming to you on another of what I'm calling a Writing Wednesday to talk about how I work on structuring the plot in in the books that I'm writing. I mentioned in the previous video, which I'll link somewhere either here at the end of the video, and I'll put it in a playlist too, that I have. I tend to sort of do a lot of in terms of the initial plotting or the initial like ideas for the story of writing down or not writing down, like sort of thinking about it and daydreaming it and like replaying it, playing important scenes in my head and sort of workshopping them there before I get to writing them down. I would say that I did that, and that's sort of where it comes from. And usually, like through that, I have sort of at least the major events before I sit down to write. I usually have like the major like events or things that I want to have happen in my books, um, sort of planned out. For my first book, I more or less just sat down and wrote, and just when I felt that I'd gotten to a reasonable conclusion of a thought or the scene was going to change, I would move to a new chapter, and that worked fairly well altogether. But didn't involve, especially when I was editing, a lot of several places where I constricted two chapters together, a couple places where they were split up into multiple chapters, just because I was sort of very like free flow writing. What I did for my second book, and I'm currently doing as I'm working on my third book, is basically once I have an idea and sit down and read, I sort of the first thing I do in the document is I sort of write out a table of content with the chapters where I think about the major events I want to have happen, major events, conversations, action I want to occur in the story, and sort of I have them sort of in my head in a rough order. And I go through like, okay, and sort of put them all in order. And when it's reasonable or when I have and sort of separate them out, like for my most the book I'm writing right now, When Gods Do Metal, I had the opening scene in mind. I'd had it in mind for a while. So the prologue, okay, that's here. I had the introduction of the main plot, that's chapter one. Okay, now they need to we need to introduce you know chapter two, sort of get to know the characters a little bit. Chapter three, that's another big event where they get sort of their main quest or introduce sort of one of the main plots, at least the first half of the story. And then from then on, chapter and then would structure it from there, which leads to sometimes like a couple places like, okay, and then they go to this temple and get a map, that's chapter 4 or 5, 4 or 5, doesn't matter. But like, okay, and the next thing that happens is here. Well, in this situation, I think I can sort of, for lack of a better word, you know it's not unreasonable, or I can justify sort of a jump in time, and sort of included one of my interludes in there where I sort of introduced the wider world. And then the next time, like, okay, they find the first thing they're looking for, another interlude. Like, I don't want to have them just here. I don't think it where I just sort of think through. That's kind of ended up being my first day of writing for this book, is like, okay, what's this one, I don't think, because they're traveling a larger distance and it's a longer time, I don't think it really works to just have them jump immediately to the next thing. I think I need like a little bit of a break. Okay, here's a chapter which sort of I have a rough map of the world and what's going on, where I just put it in. Okay, the next chapter is then them getting to where they're going, and that's sort of how it goes on, of like, but using the table of content to sort of like producing a structure where, the title addresses either the location or the theme or something that happens in the chapter, and then just, working down as a structure of the story. um and then usually that also gives me an idea of what's coming up, that once I'm writing, like, okay, these chapters, prologue, I've had this in my brain for a while, I just need to, write it and flesh out details. Same thing with chapter 1, same thing with chapter 2. Okay, chapter 3, I know what happens, but sometimes there's chapters where I only have like half figured out. Like, you know, I don't want to like throw, that just like, I want there to be a structure and a flow to the story. So, chapter 3, where, it's like, okay, I know the major event that needs to happen is they get assigned this, this quest, or introduce sort of their main goal for the first half of the story. But I don't want them just to jump into this, meeting. So here's some details, and that gives me an opportunity again to flesh out the characters and flesh out the world of them, finding out about this and going to the meeting and what they're seeing and feeling and thinking, and flow through there. And that's how it goes forward. It also allows me to, once I finish a chapter, I can look at the table of contents. I usually highlight the whole table of contents at first in red, and then go back and highlight, once I finish a chapter, rough drafting a chapter, I go back and will, change that chapter, number and title to black, the black letter coloring in Word, just to show that they're, that I've done it. But it allows me then to look at, what I have coming up next, and can start thinking about it. If it's a chapter where I only have a vague idea of what's to happen, like what the one I finished 2 weekends ago, finished last weekend, I can't remember, but when I finished it, it was like, the chapter, the most recent completed chapter I have was one where it's like, okay, I don't want to jump from, you know, this scene right to this scene. So, this is a scene we're going to learn a little bit more about, characters and the threats they face, but in general, they're just traveling through the forest. Okay. And it gave me, before I started writing, a week to sort of start playing through that in my head, playing with ideas, like, and it allowed me to come up with something, that I'm pretty happy with. Of like, okay, they're traveling through the forest. Like, no, they're supposed to be sort of, hiding from these people that pursue them. So, not traveling on their own, riding as a part of a caravan. Merchants' caravans you know, were a thing that makes sense, especially, with the setting of the world. I can talk about like the threats and what's going on, a little opportunity for, my main characters are very much focused on their specific task, but I have my interludes overall that, shine a light on the whole world and what all of what's going on, of which what they're doing is a part of. But here's a good example, or a good opportunity for my main characters, who've largely been traveling on their own, to find out some information about what's going on in the world, and get some knowledge and discussion with each other. So that came up very well, and I came up, rather than writing, they ran into a cousin of one of the main characters, which I had a lot of fun, writing this sort of gruff, grumpy, whatever, character. So I actually had fun with that, and it just sort of came to me as an idea, and like a decent chunk of the chapter is sort of discussions around that I had fun with. And then the chapter I'm writing right now is similarly, and I'm going to talk in a later video a little bit more about sort of like, writer's block and sort of some of the things I do when I run into more challenging things. But this is one where, similarly, I know what needs to happen at the end of the chapter, but I've been writing this one a little bit slower because sort of parsing together exactly what I want, how I want you know, the chapter to flow, because I don't want them, for obvious reasons of drama, of pacing, of interest. I don't want them just to easily find what they're looking for, but I don't want to make it too complicated and or long and drawn out. And it's sort of, I'm sort of wrestling with finding that balance, um, of what I'm doing. And I've played through several ideas in my head, and I think I'm close to something I'm happy with, and hopefully I can, that'll sort of get my flow going where I'm able to, where I literally only last weekend wrote a few pages of it, just because I was sort of writing a bit slower, sort of parsing out what I'm doing, and I'm hoping I can really, this weekend during my writing time, hit the ground running. Um, but yeah, that's sort of what I do, how I plot out and structure things. Obviously, and then when I go back through editing, you know, I go back and decide to, sometimes I'll add, um, little vignettes to, add additional details and discussion and conversation and setting. One of the things, as well as fixing the many typographical errors that, a rough draft always has, sometimes even a finished product. My Even reading the first half of my first book, which I've edited I don't know how many times. I found two or three typos, even just there. So typos happen, and even many rounds of editing don't catch them all. But certainly, my editing, I go through and try to fix a lot of the typos, and I'll talk about more about editing in a later video as well. And the challenges of there, it's one of my less favorite parts of writing, shall we say. Um, and interacting. So yeah, I have fun with, that's how I sort of plot things out. And sometimes it's helped that I very rarely, like, I'll add like sort of, sub things, additional scenes to chapters when I'm going back later, but sort of having the plot structured at the beginning has, for my second book, and at least so far, I'm about a third of the way through my third book, has put me in a position where I don't think I'm going to have to, like, add any chapters or any like major plot scenes, because I know all of what's going to happen. I think I'll just be adding sort of detail and character to the world. Um, and yeah, just that, that initial, but I really, but, the core, my big takeaway, my personal recommendation, if you have a different way that works for me, that works for you, absolutely go ahead and do it. But my second and third books, I have found it really, really helpful to, before I actively get into writing, to sit down and take all of the various ideas and plot and structure and, put them in order, give a rough chronology to when and how things are happening, and, just put that out, rough chronology to when things are happening, when things should happen, where there's gaps of, like, oh, this event and this event take place hundreds of miles apart, so it's got to take place over a few months. I really want to jump, or a few weeks, not a few months, 100 miles. Do I really want to jump all that way, or, you know, what do I want to do with that? So yeah, that's a little bit about how I like to plot and write and structure my books. I hope that's helpful. If you have any of your own thoughts, tips, best practices, whatever you want to call it, feel free to share it in the comments. I would love to hear more about that. Um, as always, I like to end with a little plug for myself. We have my first book, The Shadow of the Past, that is available on Amazon, as is And the Sun Burned Red. Both of them are available in paperback and on Kindle, to either buy or rent through the Kindle Unlimited library. And the Sun Burned Red is also available in hardback. I would also love for you to uh, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, share this video, anything like that, as a writer trying to promote himself, any of that, I would sincerely appreciate. But I'll finish by saying I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and that you're able to get some writing or creating done whenever you can. Uh, I wish you all the best.